gaga over that. How did we start this out? Oh, yeah, snowflakes. I mean, really.
Snowflakes. Yep. Now, with that said, think about the reaction, the worldwide reaction to the falling of the Twin Towers. I mean, that was significant. That was world-changing. That was something people should have paid attention to, and a lot of people did. I'm not saying they didn't. But how many people remember it now? You know, how many people even think about it? And yet mention Lady Diana, and people of a certain era and older, all of a sudden it all comes rushing back, and it's all a terrible experience again.
Now, I don't know that that's entirely fair. I think a lot of people, I think more people could tell you what they were doing and where they were when they saw or heard about the Twin Towers attack than where they were and what they were doing when they heard that Lady Diana had died.
Actually, I will retract that. I think you're right, because I know exactly where I was when the towers came down.
Where were you?
I was over at a buddy's place, Jim. He and I were splitting up by hand his firewood supply for the winter and sliding it in through his basement window to stack it in the house. And we were, each of us would take a turn at splitting a piece of wood, and we had the radio on, and all of a sudden we started hearing something about an incident in New York City. It took me 24 hours to actually see the images on TV of what had happened. But I know very well, it was a bright September, warm, sunny day, and we were trying to get his wood done before the cold set in. And I remember it very, very well. So that's why I'm going to retract that statement. I don't think I'm alone in that. You're quite right. I may have made a bad analogy there.
Oh, it's okay, Nick. We forgive you, Nick. We forgive you.
I feel so much better now, Joseph.
Yeah. I was dropping the kids off at school when I was on my way to drop them off at school because we were carpooling, and I heard about a plane possibly hitting one of the towers. And if you're from New York, you probably know that this is actually. Okay, it's not a regular occurrence, but it's not unheard of for airplanes to hit skyscrapers in New York.
That's right.
And including, if my memory serves me correctly, I think there actually was an incident where a small airplane crashed into the World Trade Center. Certainly there was with the Empire State Building. In fact, a bomber, B-17 bomber, flew into the Empire State Building at one point in time shortly after World War II. So
actually, it was a B-24, but you're right.
Oh, okay. So I thought it was a B-17, B-24.
No.
Thankfully, without a load of bombs. So anyway, I heard this, and it was one of those things, a news thing. And then, as I was dropping the kids off, I heard that another plane, or there had been another explosion at the other tower, and I immediately knew it was a terrorist attack. Because the chances of having a plane hit one tower and then a plane hit the other tower within minutes of one another were just, beyond astronomical. I wasn't aware that it was a plane in either case. I actually thought someone had fired some sort of a missile at the tower or whatever. So it turned out to be much more horrific than I anticipated. But I was working downtown on Parliament Hill at the time, and so I drove downtown, and we had some emergency meetings convened already by the time I was down there about 9:30 or so. And we knew right away, we knew that morning that this was an act of war, and that we were somehow or other, that we were going to war against somebody over this, that we were going to get drawn in. That was the talk at that time, except for all of the panic, because it was like every 15 minutes there was a rumor that there was a plane headed to, crash into the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, and people would rush out and go, "Oh, what's going on? What's going on?" There were people in the streets, and it was quite an event. Much more significant, in my very humble opinion, much more consequential than changing the clocks twice a year.
Yeah, no kidding. It's funny how we go down these rabbit holes because I'm just thinking that was in 2011, right?
What, the World Trade Center?
9/11?
No, it was in 2001. It's going to be
20 years ago?
It's going to be 20 years ago this September.
Do you realize there's people who are now adults that were not alive when that happened?
And isn't, yeah, thanks for making me feel old, Nick.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Time has a way of doing that to you.
Nick and I are the same age almost. We're a few months apart. So, but yeah, you're not wrong, Nick. It's there are people who are alive today who are adults who weren't even born when that happened. So
yeah, and everything that's happened since then. The irresistible. I remember when we got involved in Afghanistan, and I was on the radio at the time, and I was saying to people, especially members of the military, because people just fell in love with the Canadian military all over again. You know, the Army, especially the Army, but the whole force in general, but especially the Army, because of all the good work that we're doing in Afghanistan and the courage they showed on the battlefield, and, you know, fell into our, they followed in the tradition of the Canadian military in exemplary fashion. They punched above their weight. They were one tough outfit. And the Taliban was right to be afraid of them. But I remember saying, you know, enjoy this moment in the sun. That you've earned it, enjoy it, but it isn't going to last. Once this, you know, passes more and more, goes further and further astern of us, that, you know, that level of admiration you're enjoying now is going to fade away. And it has. I mean, people are now, you know, yeah, that was then, this is now. I'm not saying that people aren't still enamored with the military, but at the same time, it's not at the level it was in 2010, 11, and 12.
Indeed, it is not. And that's for a number of complicated reasons. But, you know,
well,
you'll recall, Nick, that the 9/11 and then our decision to participate in the campaign in Afghanistan came a mere 10 years after the Somalia scandal. And,
yeah.
You know, and who's even talking about that? So, you know, there were a lot of black eyes, self-inflicted wounds to the reputation of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Army in particular, and the Afghan campaign was an opportunity for the Army to rebuild and rehabilitate its reputation, which I think it did marvelously.
I do too.
But it's, you know, the thing that I can't shake from my mind really is how quickly time has passed and how quickly people forget. I think that's the other thing.
This too. Really, circling back, this really does set the clock ahead, doesn't it? I mean, in a very philosophical way, it's not just the physical clocks that have been set ahead, and not by just an hour. When you look at life in general and say, how far have we come in the last 10 years? We've been through, as a nation, a tremendous amount. We've been through a recession, a deep recession, a housing market collapse. We've been through COVID. We're going through COVID. We've been through Afghanistan, you know, all this sort of thing ever since 9/11 that has shaped the country in a way that obviously that was a real milestone in our history. Even though it didn't affect us directly, we had 27 Canadians die that day, but at the same time, it wasn't an attack on us, on our soil. That came much later when Anthony Carrillo was killed at the War Museum by that terrorist. You know, when he was shot. That was also another one of those fundamental moments in our history that made people sit up and grow up a fair amount.
Yeah.
There's always that saying, we lost our innocence, but that seems to happen over and over again. Every generation has to do that.
Well, I will say this, and just watching the clock, just sort of to close out one final thought on this subject, Nick, and that is that, prior to the events of September 11th, 2001, prior to that, the single greatest attack, active aviation terrorism to have occurred in history was the bombing of the Air India passenger plane.
Yes. Which originated in Canada.
Which originated in Canada, and most of the people who died in that attack were Canadians. So I've always found it a curiosity that we pay so much attention to 9/11, and 9/11 was on a much greater magnitude, obviously for obvious reasons. But again, I think this is an interesting example of how we as Canadians continue to take our cues with respect to what is and is not important from a Canadian perspective from American mass media.
Yeah, funny that, isn't it?
Yeah. But anyway, all I have to say before we go to the break is, grow a pair, ladies and gentlemen. Get over it. It's just an hour.
And you might get it back in the fall.
Unless they change the law. In which case you will get it back in the fall and not lose it again the next spring. Anyway, enough said with this, ladies and gentlemen. If you're listening to the show live, stick with us. We'll be back for hour number 2. That means segment number 3. And if you're listening to the podcast, thank you for joining us. And you will get to listen to segment number 3, posted on Monday morning, here on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.